Under the spotlights of the Cambridge University Annual Debate Championship, youth representatives from 10 nations stood on stage. When it was Maya Garcia's turn to speak, her British opponent interjected with a cold, dismissive tone that cut through the air. Someone from a country so torn by its own border politics and systemic inequality wants to lecture us on global vision? Go fix your own broken home first. A wave of soft, derisive chuckles rippled through the grand hall. Whispers spread like wildfire. All eyes turned to Maya, waiting for the rebuttal, waiting for the anger to boil over. But she did nothing of the sort. Maya stood in silence for a few seconds, her gaze calm and unyielding. She turned, picked up a pen from the lectern, and bent over a blank sheet of paper. She wrote a single sentence. No explanation, no furious counter-argument. When she finished, she looked up and held the paper high in the air. The British competitor, who had been preening with arrogance just moments before, stared at the paper. His expression slowly transformed, his fingers trembling slightly. In less than 30 seconds, he unclipped his microphone, turned, and walked off the stage in silence. The hall fell completely quiet for a moment, then erupted into a thunderous, sustained ovation. What exactly was written on that paper? Long before the international debate competition, Maya knew she wouldn't be easily accepted. The event was held in the United Kingdom, in the hallowed hall of an ancient college. Stone walls were adorned with the emblems of universities from around the world, but she couldn't find the familiar stars and stripes she expected. On her application, she had written United States of America, but when she arrived, her name badge read, starkly, Texas. She walked to the registration desk to have it corrected. The staffer simply smiled and said, "I'm sorry, that's how it's set in the system. I can't change it." Maya said nothing more. She flipped the name badge over and pinned it to the inside of her jacket, leaving only her name visible. She was used to this quiet erasure. Abroad, whether in academic circles or public spaces, she always had to answer the question she dreaded most first. Where are you from? Every time, she wanted to say, the United States. But it was often followed by, oh, the place with all the political chaos, right? She had learned to smile, to stay quiet. Sometimes she would retort, can you tell the difference between Scotland and England? But mostly, she saved her arguments for her speeches, her work, her actions. She wasn't here to argue, she was here to win. This was a high-level international debate competition for youth. All contestants were required to speak in their native language and be fluent in understanding others. She was the only competitor using American English in the debates, and one of the few from a nation often reduced to a caricature on the world stage. On the first day of the competition, her opponent was a male law student from France. He was polite and composed. They debated the topic, should social media have limits on public expression? Maya cited evidence and case studies from North and South America. Her competitor complimented her, saying, "Your perspective and points are entirely different from ours in Europe, but that's precisely what gives them so much weight." She won the round to resounding applause. In the second round, she faced a female PhD candidate in sociology from India. The topic was, does cultural globalization erode local traditions? Her opponent spoke with relentless energy, while Maya used a measured, deliberate style, dismantling the opposing arguments one by one. She concluded with a short, powerful phrase in Spanish, earning immense praise from the judges. That day, a British coach approached her. He smiled and warned, "Your next opponent won't be so courteous, you know." She paused for a moment. The man patted her shoulder gently and walked away. Her third-round opponent was Simon Knight, a local British student, president of the host university's debate club, and a rising star already being watched by the media. When Maya saw him backstage, he was joking with a volunteer, his speech rapid and laced with condescension. "The next one, I hear she's from some forgotten corner of the Americas, and we're supposed to treat her like a representative of a global power? What a vivid imagination." Maya said nothing, calmly jotting down key points for the debate topic in her notebook. Her opponent glanced at her and said with a smirk, "Don't worry, I won't be too hard on you. I only truly debate with opponents from developed countries." When it was time to take the stage, the topic was announced, in the age of globalization, should youth still be educated in national consciousness? The atmosphere was tense. The judges sat, stoic and serious. In the audience were observers from various countries, faculty, students, and dozens of media representatives. Maya was well prepared, her logic clear. In her first 5 minutes, she argued firmly that national identity is not about exclusion, but about the evidence of cultural confidence. She spoke of how smaller cultures can maintain their identity amidst a globalized world. She spoke of language, memory, land, and values. The applause was significant. Then, it was Simon's turn. At first, he merely responded to her case studies on smaller cultures with sarcasm, using tales of African tribes during the colonial era to patronizingly frame the status of her home in the eyes of the West. Then, he threw out that sentence. Someone from a country so torn by its own border politics and systemic inequality wants to lecture us on global vision? Go fix your own broken home first. The hall went silent, not out of surprise, but out of familiarity. Familiarity with the arrogance born from a Western-centric worldview. Familiarity with the latent hostility towards those perceived as other. Familiarity with the use of rules and definitions to secretly draw lines and exclude. Some international students laughed, a reaction mixed with a sense of superiority and disdain. Maya lowered her head, turning a page in her notes, and remained quiet for a moment. She didn't rush to respond. She knew that impulsiveness was the most fatal flaw in a debate, and that such an insult only showed her opponent was underestimating her. She continued with her own points, her expression unchanged but her tone now imbued with a new weight. She used the protests that had erupted in various countries in recent years, sparked by cultural denial, to prove that a rejected sense of self inflicts wounds on future generations. She quoted her mother, "A name isn't for proving you exist. A name is your existence." She didn't mention the United States again, but used a rich vocabulary to evoke its presence repeatedly. The debate entered the rebuttal phase. Simon attacked aggressively, hammering on terms like unstable democracy, a nation of political gridlock, and struggling with systemic injustice. The moderators had to warn him several times to control his language. But the more he spoke, the more emboldened he became, as if victory was already in his grasp. In the final 3 minutes, she stopped arguing. She put down her microphone, picked up the blank scoring card from beside her, and slowly wrote a single sentence. She wrote slowly but firmly. When she finished, she stood up and held the paper high. Simon saw it, and his smile froze instantly. The audience couldn't see the words on the paper, but they saw his reaction. He fell silent, his face pale, the hand holding the microphone trembling slightly. 5 seconds later, he turned to the moderator and said, "I withdraw." He offered no explanation, simply turned his back and walked off the stage. Some of the judges' jaws dropped, but no sound came out. Maya remained standing, her right hand holding up that piece of paper. 10 seconds later, the hall erupted in the loudest applause of the entire competition. She slowly walked off the stage, handed the paper to the lead judge, and returned to her seat without saying a word. On that piece of paper was written, "Just because you don't give us a platform doesn't mean we don't have a voice. You can't see it because you choose to be blind." She hadn't mentioned nations or affixed any labels, but the sentence was as sharp as a blade, tearing down the curtain of false civility and making it impossible for anyone to feign ignorance any longer. Backstage, a staff member whispered, "Now that is a real debate." After leaving the stage, Maya didn't look back at the audience, nor did she pay attention to the admiring gazes of the judges. She went backstage, folded the paper, and put it in her pocket, as if hiding a passport whose importance was often overlooked. The applause outside continued unabated. On the backstage monitor, the moment was replayed over and over, the image of her holding up that single sheet of paper. The staff crowded around, watching the social media feed refresh. Posts and comments poured in like a flood. But she didn't look. She sat in a chair, drank some water, and stared blankly at the floor. 10 minutes after the debate ended, someone uploaded a clip of her holding up the paper with the caption, "U.S. representative doesn't dignify insult with a response," writes one sentence. Opponent withdraws instantly. Within 2 hours, the video had over 1 million views. The hashtag number, "You choose to be blind," trended rapidly on multiple platforms. Someone screenshotted the paper with the text, "The United States doesn't need your permission to exist." Someone else edited her opponent's insults against the image of her standing silently, holding the paper. Others found old photos of her at various competitions, posting them with captions like, "She comes from a place they overlook, yet stands on the world's most formidable stage." The storm had begun. The next morning, the BBC Morning News gave special coverage to the debate. A young American woman was questioned about her country's political stability. She retorted with a single sentence and caused her opponent to concede on the spot. She did not mention her nation, but pointed out the hypocrisy of a superpower's perspective. Soon after, The Guardian and the New York Times published similar commentaries. When a manufactured image can no longer define existence, the new generation is using other methods to carve their names onto the world map. This isn't a regional issue, but a truth about how the world will confront those it has refused to acknowledge. In stark contrast to Maya's quietude, Simon deleted his social media accounts and disappeared for 2 full days. A press conference planned for him was canceled. The media lined up to interview Maya, but she refused them all. She offered no explanation and issued no statement of her position. Her advisor, seeing her sitting in the library reading page by page, couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you going to clarify anything?" Maya just smiled and replied, "I'm not clarifying. I'm continuing." She was preparing for the final round. Meanwhile, the sentence on that paper began to be cited in various circles. A foreign correspondent wrote in a commentary, "You can't see it because you choose to be blind." This is not just about the situation in America. It is a question for the entire international system. An intern at a UN human rights organization posted privately, "I have never seen a retort so cool yet so sharp." She used language, but it felt more like a scalpel. A student from Egypt commented, "I come from the slums, called stateless. I used to think that if I had no name, I had no voice. She showed me that a name is not something others bestow upon you." Maya remained silent until the 3rd day. Simon appeared on a talk show. The host asked him directly, "Why did you withdraw from the competition?" Simon replied with a neutral expression, "Because I said something on stage that I shouldn't have." "Which sentence was that?" the host pressed. He was silent for several seconds, then said, "I used to think that international competition was built on rules. She made me realize that some people don't live by those rules." Enbel from. The host said, "She didn't even argue with you. She just wrote one sentence." Simon looked down. That one sentence was heavier than any rebuttal. The host said softly, "Just because you don't give us a platform doesn't mean we don't have a voice. You can't see it because you choose to be blind." Simon closed his eyes. She won, and not just the debate. That night, the interview went viral again. But Maya was in her dorm room, drafting a letter to her old high school in El Paso. She was preparing to summarize her experience in a report. The same high school where she was once docked points in a speech contest because her English carried a heavy Spanish accent. In the letter, she wrote, "I didn't win the debate for the United States. I just proved one thing. We don't exist because we are acknowledged. We exist because we have never disappeared. And for that reason, we must be seen." Afrain. The night before the final, a female competitor from the Netherlands approached her and asked cautiously, "Are you going to write on paper again? If I were attacked like that, I would have lost my composure." Maya smiled and replied, "I'm not much of a fighter, but I like to leave something behind." The woman said, "When I stood next to you, I felt like you were an entire country." She didn't reply, just nodded gently. On the final day of the competition, the sky was a dreary gray. A light London rain was falling. Maya stood in front of her dorm, one hand holding an umbrella, the other her bag. Her advisor ran up to her and pressed a printed sheet of paper into her hand. The announcement just came out. His expression was complicated. "You should see this." She took the paper. A raindrop fell on the text, blurring the ink. She scanned it quickly, her expression unchanging, but her fingertips pressed slightly, creasing the paper. "The final round will not permit the presentation of topics related to political conflicts, nationality, or national symbols." She understood what this sentence meant, and she understood that this wasn't the first time, but this time was different. She walked into the competition venue. The hall was packed. The broadcast team was ready, lights focused on the center of the stage. The topic for the final debate was written on a blackboard. Should the youth of today still fight for their nation? How ironic. The moderator announced the speaking order. It began with the other American competitor. He spoke fluently about responsibility, loyalty, and how the nation gives you everything. His words were filled with a fervent patriotism and Western confidence. Then, it was Maya's turn. She stood up and walked to the podium. In that second, the entire hall fell silent. She looked out at the audience below, at the diplomatic observers sitting in the back row behind the judges. One of the men frowned, his expression severe. She cleared her throat softly and began to speak. She did not say the words, "United States of America." She didn't wave a flag. She didn't shout. She just told a story. I grew up in a place you might have only heard about on the news, because it's almost always talked about in a negative light. I learned 2 languages as a child. At school, when we read our lessons, we had to read with a standard accent. Otherwise, we lost points. But my grandmother could only speak the non-standard one. Every time I imitated her, my teachers would correct me. I was 7 years old. I started to think that the language she spoke was improper, something wrong that needed to be fixed. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. When I grew up, I realized that she was simply speaking in the way that had allowed her to survive. And what I was taught was merely a technique for erasure. The audience didn't laugh, didn't move. She continued, "I came to compete here. Someone told me that the place I come from has so many internal problems, it shouldn't be lecturing on global vision." I didn't answer him then, but I want to tell him one thing. She paused, looking directly at that delegate sitting in the last row. The only thing truly worth fighting for in this world is not a nation. It is that when you say, "I am from here, from anywhere," no one will interrupt you, deny you, or force you to erase it. Some of the judges began taking notes. Some looked at her with a newfound seriousness. Even the diplomatic observer, who initially had a cold expression, nodded slowly. She hadn't used a single argumentative term, not one political phrase. In the last 30 seconds, she took a deep breath and slowly pulled the crumpled piece of paper from inside her blazer. It was the same one she had written on the day Simon withdrew. She unfolded it, held it up, and then placed it firmly in the middle of the podium. This was a blank scoring card. On the first day of the competition, I wrote a sentence on it. She paused. "But today, I don't want it to belong to just one person anymore." She took another piece of paper from her pocket and wrote a new sentence on it. She held it high. The hall was utterly silent. A voice can be silenced, but a name can never be erased. No flags, no slogans, no symbols. But in that instant, everyone understood where she came from, and they understood what she represented. Some judges had tears in their eyes. Some bowed their heads in thought. Applause started from the farthest corner and slowly spread, engulfing the entire hall. The competition ended. Maya did not stay for interviews and did not appear at the awards ceremony. She walked through the backstage area, past the crowds, grabbed her bag, and left the venue. As soon as she was outside, a local British student ran after her, holding out a notebook. "Could you please write something for me?" She took the pen and wrote on the first page, "I don't need you to represent me, and I don't need your permission to exist." She signed her name, handed the book back, and disappeared into the rain. 3 days later, the clip of her final debate was replayed on international media. The headlines never mentioned Texas and didn't write about her country. But the comment sections were filled with the same sentence. She never said its name, but she made us remember it. The 2 sentences on the 2 pieces of paper were translated into more than a dozen languages. They were printed on youth advocacy posters, in teaching materials, and on the promotional covers for the United Nations Youth Assembly. Her speech that day was later included in a pragmatics textbook at an international university, under a chapter titled, "Those Who Choose to Be Blind." Eventually, she returned home. It was early morning at the El Paso International Airport. There was no welcoming ceremony, only her mother waiting at the exit. Her mother smiled and asked, "Did you get to say what you needed to say this time?" She nodded gently. Her mother asked again, "And did they understand?" She looked down and smiled. They saw. She didn't shout, she didn't make excuses, she didn't try to prove who was right or wrong. She simply stood on a stage and used 2 pieces of paper and 2 sentences to make the whole world see a name that had long been obscured. She came from a place seen as riddled with internal problems, yet she made a confident world power stop and listen. There was no flag raised for her at the event, but her actions told everyone that not all existence waits for your acknowledgement to happen. Your choice to be blind doesn't mean we disappear. Your disdain for our problems cannot stop us from taking the world stage. She won not just a competition, but the dignity of thousands, of millions who have been dismissed. If you too have ever been suppressed, erased, or denied, then let this be a message to them. We are still here, we have a name, and we are not waiting for anyone to define us.